You know, for 2 whole decades, one of New York City's most famous, most celebrated skyscrapers was hiding an absolutely terrifying secret. It was, without a doubt, the most dangerous building in the city, and only a tiny handful of people knew. This is the story of how an engineering marvel secretly became a ticking time bomb.
Okay, get this. In the summer of 1978, engineers ran the numbers on this brand new tower, and they figured out the chance of it collapsing was 1 in 16 in any given year. That's not some 1 in a million long shot. We're talking about a near certainty that a storm big enough to knock it over would hit New York within just a few decades.
And the person who did that terrifying math? It was the building's own chief structural engineer, Bill LeMessurier. I mean, can you even imagine? He was faced with this impossible choice. Admit a colossal, career-ending mistake, or stay quiet and gamble with thousands and thousands of lives.
So how in the world did this happen? To really get it, we've got to look at the building itself. This was the Citicorp Center. It had been open for less than a year and was already an icon. But hidden deep inside its revolutionary design was a critical, fatal flaw.
Back then, the press was calling it an acrobatic act of architecture, and honestly, they weren't wrong. The entire skyscraper was designed around this one really specific problem on the ground, and the solution led to a structure that looked like it was defying gravity itself.
So here's the deal. The problem was a church. St. Peter's Church owned the corner of the lot, and they weren't moving. So LeMessurier came up with this incredibly bold plan. Just lift the whole 59-story skyscraper up on 4 gigantic stilts, letting the corners hang right over the new church below. The columns weren't at the corners where they're strongest, but right in the middle of each side.
To make this wild idea work, LeMessurier designed this really clever system of stacked, V-shaped braces. They're called chevrons, each one 8 stories high. He basically designed the building to push its own weight outwards through these huge diagonal braces and then down into those stilts. It was just a brilliant, elegant solution to a really tricky problem.
Now, because of this chevron design, the building was incredibly lightweight. But that created a new problem. It tended to sway in the wind, which, can make people inside feel pretty sick. So, LeMessurier installed the first ever tuned mass damper in a skyscraper. It was basically a 400-ton block of concrete sitting on oil at the top, designed to slide and counteract the sway. It worked, and it also saved them about $4 million in steel.
So the building was a huge triumph. LeMessurier was a star in the architectural world. But then, in the spring of 1978, he gets a phone call. It's from an engineering student who's writing a paper on the tower. And that one, single, routine call was about to change everything. The student asked a simple question that made LeMessurier go back and check a detail he hadn't thought about in a while. And what he found was that a change had been made during construction. To save about $250,000, the contractor swapped out the super strong welded joints for bolted ones. And LeMessurier's own firm had signed off on it, thinking, it was no big deal.
But that student's question, it just kept bugging him. So he decided to rerun all the wind calculations, including one that building codes back in the 70s didn't even require. It's called a quartering wind, when the wind hits the corner of the building, not flat on its face. And what he found, it made his blood run cold. A quartering wind didn't spread the load out. It focused it, cranking up the stress on some of those joints by a staggering 40%.
Suddenly, it was a perfect storm of errors. You had the weaker bolted joints, combined with calculations that completely missed that 40% extra stress from quartering winds. It left the building dangerously, catastrophically weak. I mean, the joints around the 30th floor were held together by just 4 bolts when they needed 14 to be safe. The building was literally a ticking time bomb. LeMessurier knew he had to do something. After what must have been an absolutely agonizing night, weighing all the options, he flew to New York, walked into Citicorp headquarters, and told them everything. And that set off one of the most incredible top-secret repair jobs in history. And all of this with hurricane season just around the corner.
This timeline just shows you how insane the rush was. They codenamed the repairs Project Serene and started almost immediately. They quietly drafted an emergency evacuation plan with the Red Cross for a 10-block radius. We're talking over 200,000 people. And then, right in the middle of all this, a monster hurricane started heading their way.
The repair plan itself was something else. I mean, you can't just tell thousands of office workers that their building might fall down, right? The panic would be insane. So every single night after the last person went home, a crew of welders would sneak in,
tear open the walls, weld these massive steel plates over the weak joints, and then patch everything back up like they were never there. And just as the crews were getting into a rhythm with these secret repairs, the team's absolute worst nightmare started to come true. A massive hurricane, Hurricane Ella, was churning in the Atlantic, and it was headed straight for New York City. Ella was a monster, with winds hitting 200 kilometers per hour. Remember, LeMessurier had calculated that winds of just 110 kilometers per hour could have brought the tower down. A direct hit would have been an unimaginable catastrophe.
So for 24 gut-wrenching hours, everyone on this secret project just held their breath. The repairs were only halfway done. Were they strong enough? LeMessurier didn't know. The Red Cross was on standby. City officials were ready to give the order to evacuate a huge part of Midtown Manhattan. It was just this terrifying waiting game.
And then they got a miracle. At the last possible moment, the storm just stopped. It changed course and veered harmlessly out into the Atlantic. The city was spared. You can just imagine the sigh of relief. This incredible luck gave the crews the time they needed to finish the job, finally securing the building in October of 1978.
The tower was finally safe. The disaster had been completely averted. But for nearly 20 years, the story of just how close New York City came to an absolute catastrophe, well, that remained one of its best-kept secrets.
So the crisis happened and was fixed in 1978. But it wasn't until 1995, a full 17 years later, that a journalist for The New Yorker finally pieced the whole incredible story together and shared it with the world for the first time.
And far from being ruined, Bill LeMessurier was praised as a hero for his honesty and his courage, and his actions led to real, immediate changes. New York City updated its building codes to require that quartering wind analysis, making every skyscraper built since then safer. And the story of the Citicorp Center is now taught in engineering schools all over the world as like the ultimate lesson in professional ethics.
And that really brings us to the biggest takeaway here. Sometimes, the greatest engineering achievements aren't the soaring towers that we see every day, but the disasters that were quietly averted in secret. And it makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other invisible acts of engineering and what other quiet acts of integrity are holding our world together right now?